Okay, very good. We're now on YouTube. And so again, welcome everybody to the Human Rights Commission. For those of you who've just joined us, our chair has a last minute plumbing emergency, and our vice chair has asked me to facilitate tonight's conversation. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And we will begin with introductions. And then our agenda includes a quick approval of minutes and agenda. And during introductions, I'll confirm if we have quorum to do that. Then we have a brief presentation by Eunice Kim with the Our Salem Comprehensive Planning Effort. Really glad to get an update on that. I know the commission's been tracking that work. And then we're going to move into a good discussion. We have representatives with us today from the Salem Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, and you would have received a email with some questions in advance, and we're looking forward to engaging in the conversation around equity in our parks and recreation services. And then we'll move into our traditional reporting agenda. So with that, we traditionally begin with introductions popcorn style. And what that means is when we introduce ourselves, the request is to include your gender pronouns and to introduce yourself with your pronouns, and then ask someone else who has not yet introduced themselves to do so. And it's also, I would just like to know, when you do talk in the commission, it helps to say your name at the beginning of talking. That helps our interpreting team orient them to your screen so we can help ensure the interpretation is running smoothly. So let's see. And there's no order. We welcome our guests and introductions just like the commission. So with that, I would introduce, my name is Gretchen. I am staff to the Human Rights Commission and she, her pronouns. And I would ask Woody to introduce himself.
Thank you, Gretchen. This is Woody, he, him. I'm with SPRAB. Next, Alan.
Alan Alexander. I also serve on SPRAB. I'm also the chair of the Sunny Slope Neighborhood Association, and I use he or him. And I'd like to hear from Dr. Chandler.
Hi, everybody. I am Robert Chandler. I am the Assistant Public Works Director here in Salem. I am a he, him, his pronoun kind of guy. And I am the support person for the SPRAB subcommittee on policies and permitting. And I'll pass the speaking mouse over to Tony.
Tony, you're on mute.
Okay, let's try that again. Hello, everyone. My name is Tony Whitler, and I am a parks planner with the City of Salem and liaison to the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. And my pronouns are she, her.
Well, great. How about Dylan? Yeah.
Thank you.
You bet.
Sure, I can round out SPRAB. So Dylan McDowell with Salem Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. I use he, him pronouns. And I'll go over to Keith to round out SPRAB, I guess.
Hi, everyone. My name is Keith Norris, he, him pronouns, and I'm here with SPRAB as well. And I'll pass it over to Tricarico.
Hi, Tricarico, resident of Ward 2. My pronouns are they, them. I don't know who's gone because I got a little bit late. So if anybody wants to volunteer, please jump in.
I'll jump in. I'm Mike Waters, Commissioner in Ward 7. My pronouns are they, them, and I'll pass it to Kathy.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kathy Ostran-Function. I'm a member of the Human Rights Commission. My pronouns are she, her, and I'll pass it to David.
Hello, my name is David Reinholtz, resident of Polk County, Commissioner on the Human Rights Commission, and my pronouns are he and him, and I'll pass it to Krista.
Hi, I'm Krista. She, her pronouns. I'm a member of Ward 4, and I'm going to send it to Eunice. Did the interpreter catch that name correctly?
I'm Eunice Kim, Long Range Planning Manager for the City of Salem. She, her pronouns. And I think Kelsey.
Hi, my name is Kelsey Murray. I use she, her pronouns. I am a resident of Ward 1 and a commissioner on the board. And I think Leah, I think you might be the last person to go.
I am Leah, and I'm a community member, and she, her, hers.
Thank you so much, everybody. And for those of you just joining, I've been asked to facilitate today. Angelo has a plumbing challenge, and so we're jumping in. We do not have a quorum, and so we're going to skip past the agenda and the minutes approval and jump right into welcoming our first guest. You've been able to visit with Eunice before. We've been glad to be updated and discuss the efforts around comprehensive planning in the city of Salem with Eunice Kim and the Our Salem planning effort. And we welcome Eunice back today to hear how that's been going. Go ahead, Eunice.
Thanks for having me back. I just want to give a quick overview, kind of where we are in the project. Can I share my screen, Gretchen?
Yes, and if you find you can't, I can, are you fine?
Got it.
Okay. Go right ahead.
Okay.
Oh, actually, Eunice, real quick, Kendra, does that work for you with interpreting? Are you able to ping Eunice and Krista and still see everyone? Okay, great. Thank you. Eunice, go ahead.
So we're still working on the Our Salem project. This is a project to update our comprehensive plan. And just as a reminder, this is the plan that really guides how we grow and develop over the next 10, 20, 30 years. It has goals and policies and a map that really guide, what happens with our housing, where people live, what happens with our businesses, our transportation system, our parks plan. So it's really the kind of overarching plan that will guide our growth in the future. We hit a major milestone in our project in March, where we brought a big vision framework to the council that had goals and a map to ask for acceptance. So it wasn't an adoption process, but at that point, we had goals around, again, transportation, natural resources, housing, economic development. And we asked the council, are we headed in the right direction? They did say yes. And so now we are working on all the details. So we're working on detailed policies, zoning. So zoning is really governs what you can build on your property, how you can use your property, how tall buildings can be. So we're working on that zoning map and zoning code as well. I just want to give some examples of some of the draft policies that we have heard and that we are working on right now around equity engagement and housing. Gretchen was kind enough to share a while ago a document that you guys are working on related to, I think it's called a domains document, Gretchen, correct me if I'm wrong, around equity.
The equity, was it the equity lens? Forgive me.
It was like the domain, there was like it was like based on like housing and property and different kind of asks.
Oh, sure. That's the recommendations to council that the Human Rights Commission put together, a number of interests around, yeah, the equity asks. Thank you.
Yes. And so she shared that with me and we're looking to incorporate some of those ideas as they're related, for example, to housing and equity. So we have a lot of policies or draft policies around equity, both in terms of the process and in terms of the outcomes of our work as a city. So for example, we have a draft policy around making sure that folks can participate in our planning decisions, our investment decisions, and particularly groups that are underrepresented traditionally, whether that's a community of color or a lower income community. We also have draft policies around making sure the impacts of our work, whether that's transportation, parks, et cetera, don't negatively burden one community in Salem versus another. And so we're really looking at who's benefiting and who's maybe being burdened by our decision making. We have a draft policy around accessibility, both around our meetings and our materials. And so the idea is, making sure that not only through translation, but interpretation, location of meetings, how people can participate, making sure that, again, we're accessible to everyone. I just want to share a couple housing related policies that we're working on. One is around affordable housing. We've continued to hear that affordable housing is a major priority in Salem and a need, and that affordable housing should be distributed across the community and not concentrated in one area. So we have a policy around that. We also have one around accessibility and making sure that we encourage all types of housing. So housing that's accessible to folks with disabilities and the needs of older adults in different generations. So we're not just building one type of housing. And then more recently, we've talked a lot about our unsheltered communities and making sure that we have a continuum of housing opportunities from outdoor shelters, indoor shelters, supportive housing, transitional housing, affordable housing. And so we are posing a policy around that kind of continuum of housing. So we are in the process right now. We've done a lot of outreach to kind of craft these policies, and now we are revising them. And our goal is to bring them through the adoption process with the rest of the plan by the end of the year. So nothing is final. We're still doing a lot of work. The other major component of this is a map. And so this, again, the zoning map is what really regulates, again, what you can build on your property, how you can use your property, and what that development looks like. So we had an interactive map online. We received more than 1,500 comments, a lot of emails, a lot of phone calls, a lot of meetings. And so we're now going through all of that input to make revisions to that map. And again, we will bring that forward with the rest of the project at the end of the year. There's one last component. We have people, a committee that is working on code. So really specific regulations related to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The council set a goal of being carbon neutral by 2050. It's an ambitious goal, and we're doing what we can in the zoning code to help encourage things like housing and mixed use. So housing with jobs, housing with services in areas, for example, that have transit service. So if you think of Commercial Street or Lancaster, areas where there's good transit service, can we encourage development in the type of development we want in those areas? So that committee work is happening. It's meeting for its last time tomorrow, so you can join those meetings. Be fun. So we're targeting a work session to bring all of this information to the Planning Commission and the City Council in October, and then start the adoption process by the end of the year again. There will be a lot of opportunities for public input throughout that process, which will stretch into next year. So it's a long process. I appreciate everyone letting me give an update. And if you have any questions or comments, please let me know. This is my contact information, so if you think of anything, again, please contact me. I hope that wasn't too quick. A lot going on.
There's a lot of really good stuff there. Are there any questions or comments for Eunice?
Just one question. Will the contents of that presentation be shared with us afterward, Gretchen, if we want to take a kind of a deeper look?
Sure.
I'm happy to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? All right, Eunice, thank you. I so appreciate that you've continued to keep us engaged with this process. Thank you for everything you're doing and for all the terrific outreach you're doing to a variety of community groups as well.
Thank you so much for having me back.
You bet. Well, great. Sprab, you're on. I'm so grateful that you're here. I think this is a terrific opportunity for conversation. Appreciate your interest in equity and equitable experiences in our parks and our recreation services. Dylan, do I turn it to you? Would that be the right next step?
Yes, I can take it over, Gretchen. Thank you. So I'm Dylan McDowell, once again, from Sprab. And you should have received a short memo, a one-page memo, just outlining some of what we're working on, but I'm happy to talk through it a little bit just in a 2-minute or so overview. But to step back a little bit, I just want to share more. So for those of you that I have not met before, the Salem Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, we're a 9-member advisory board. We have a subcommittee here today that was tasked by Counsel to look at park usage and permitting and how we can make those processes more equitable throughout the city. And so we are doing a bunch of homework right now, looking at city code, at permits, looking at other cities to try and figure out what they're doing, trying to solicit input from the community. So we had a great opportunity to talk with some of you as part of the LGBTQIA intersectional task force. It was a couple weeks ago now, and we're going to be hosting a few public meetings that we're setting up right now that will be an opportunity to solicit more public input. And our goal is then to take all of this and present to Council with some recommendations of the ways that the parks can be more inclusive, more equitable, and ensure that everyone in the community feels like they have access. So I just want to quickly outline the top line questions just to frame the conversation. And really, we're here to listen. So we want to solicit your feedback, to hear ideas from you of how we can be really integrating your experiences and what you hear through the Human Rights Commission from constituents, that we can integrate that into our work and our planning. So 3 kind of broad questions. Number 1, in your experience, to what degree do you find that park policies and permitting practices are balanced and fair to all persons? Number 2, have you witnessed or been told of someone experiencing prejudice or discrimination when reserving a facility or scheduling an event at one of Salem's parks? And then number 3, with regard to park event permitting and policy practices, and for the purpose of our subcommittee, what do you believe that the city can do better to meet the needs of both the LGBTQIA community and really all communities across Salem? So those are kind of the 3 things that we're really hoping to learn from tonight. And Gretchen, I can turn it back over to you, and we're happy to keep the conversation as formal or as informal as you'd like. When we spoke with the task force, Mike did a great job of really facilitating open dialogue, and we really appreciated all of that. So I'm glad to see some familiar faces, but obviously want to hear from everyone tonight. So I'll defer to your leadership on this.
Oh,
Hey,
very good.
Gretchen, sorry to interrupt, but I think Kendra, the interpreter, can't see me. It's time for us to switch. So I just want to give her break right now.
Thank
Thanks.
you. I'm glad you did. Kendra, do you have it?
Yeah, we got it. She's off
Great.
now.
Great. Well, any initial questions or comments or feedback from members of the Human Rights Commission on those good discussion questions?
If I may try and generalize it a little bit more, Gretchen, I think perhaps starting with something a little higher level, and just in terms of what has been all of your experiences in relation to how people feel comfortable using the parks, people that you talk with, people that potentially come and provide public testimony to the Human Rights Commission, people in your wards. Are there cases where you feel like that things have not been done equitably, or people have not felt safe using the parks, and especially reserving facilities or making that space something that they want to go use? And if there's cases like that, obviously I want to respect privacy and don't want anyone to have to divulge too much, but the more even general anecdotes that we can use to inform some of our work would be helpful.
Thank you. David, I think you'd unmuted. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I just have I guess a comment or an observation. So I follow a few different Facebook groups, and a lot of times they're talking about parks, and they're usually talking about a group that's there that hasn't got a permit, or they're talking about a group that's kind of taken over a park that they're not really sure should have taken over a park. And so when I read into that, I mean, you can create all kinds of policies and procedures, but I guess my comment is, what about the monitoring and the enforcement part of it? So what's the monitoring mechanism to make sure that somebody that actually is there actually truly has a permit? And then the enforcement part of it, what's going to happen, when they do realize that that person doesn't have a permit? And I think that's where it becomes on these Facebook groups that I follow where people feel like it's not inclusive or people would be discriminated is because I think it's a breakdown of this, no one's monitoring it. And I don't know if that's the case or not. Not necessarily the policy or procedure.
Thank you. Would you all like to respond to questions as they emerge, or would you rather listen and receive the questions?
I will defer to you, whatever has worked best. I'm happy to just give a short response. And I do want to encourage the rest of the subcommittee, Alan, Woody, Keith, to please share your own input as well. But I would just say that, David, I really appreciate that. And I will say that one of the challenges that there is with that is the right to assemble and the constitutional rights in terms of legal enforcement. And so we had a preliminary conversation. We got to meet the new police chief. And I think that as we're trying to look at some of these policies, figuring out how we can balance progress and make sure that we're keeping it within what the police are actually able to do and learn more about what their approach is to the park. So that is a conversation that's underway as well. And I think you're on to a really important point.
And this is the interpreter just interrupting again. Sorry. I want to remind you all to please say your first name before you speak, just like this. This is Cynthia speaking. And then say what you're, because I can't see all of you. I've got the deaf person pinned so I can see her clearly. So I can't see who's talking. Thank you.
Thank you for that reminder. Very good. Alan, go ahead. And that's Alan Alexander speaking.
Hi, I'm Alan. And I certainly always defer to Dr. Chandler, but it's my understanding we went 15 months where no permits were issued to anybody. The parks were available for certain use, but there were no permits, no issued for any kind of park activity during the majority of the COVID situation. So that may have led to some confusion about who's using the park because nobody had permits.
That is correct. This is Robert, and I can shed a little bit of light on that. Is in response to actually the state direction during in early parts of in middle parts of the COVID pandemic, we stopped issuing any kind of permits or reservations in our park facilities. There are a lot of reasons for that, but we basically stopped doing that. A number of groups that had reservations, including a group that had reservations and had paid their fees to meet, I think, once a week at a certain spot in park, had lost that reservation. They continued to meet. We refunded their money. And other groups took advantage of the no permit, no reservation situation and just showed up and did what they wanted to do, whether it was a birthday party or something else, because we were not issuing reservations. That complicates the perception, certainly from the last year of events in the park. Typically, pre-COVID, we would reserve a space, collect the fee. There was an agreement with the contact person for the event, and generally everything went smoothly. Majority of complaints we had to do with sound being amplified too loudly. Does that help? Looking for nonverbal cues from my screen. All right. Yeah. Thanks.
This is Tricarico. So it sounds like maybe that's an area the city could look at to improve upon, right? Like, how did that decision impact the communities? Sounds like from David's feedback, maybe there were some negative impacts. And I don't know how connected you are to some of the proposals that this council this commission put forth to city council, including the equity lens specifically designed for the city, and perhaps some of those tools could help inform that work. And I know that part of that was, continued partnership from the HRC to other groups in the city to kind of take a look at that and how it impacted the community. So I wanted to kind of put that out there. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but it's another thing to consider.
I think I'm hearing threads so far of during the pandemic, there wasn't a way to technically permit gatherings. There's also just the constitutional freedom of assembly. There's questions of what the enforcement things are. tools are. We have an equity lens that we've put forward to the city that I can certainly share with you as a resource or a tool in case that's helpful in your work if we haven't yet. I think those are some of the threads I'm hearing so far in the conversation.
And this is Robert again, and Gretchen, thank you for sending us. I don't know if we got the equity lens. I think the topic came up, Mike, at the intersectional task force meeting. I don't know if we got a copy of it. I will also add, I meant to add that we are now back issuing, taking reservations, collecting permit fees, and issuing for events. So we're back to whatever normal is defined now. That's good news.
This is Mike, and first I just want to thank Sprab for coming both to the intersectional LGBTQIA intersectional task force and coming here I'll report, I suppose, later about intersectional task force, but I think one of the threads that we had from that conversation that I'm also hearing here is that maybe the questions that were posed to us aren't necessarily the right questions. In other words, do we think that the policies and the permitting procedures are raising a big concern? It doesn't sound that way, but it does sound like the park environments are a concern. So during our task force meeting, we heard from a community member who had been harassed in a park. And the question there was, what can I do? How do I respond in that moment? And similar, what I heard from David earlier today is there's concerns about some of the groups that are meeting without a permit. What can I do? How will the city respond? So I think there's a sort of a lack of community education and know-how around how to advance forward in the moment concerns they have at the park. And particularly as those concerns relate to their safety, the safety of their body and being, which is of critical importance. So I would ask you all to kind of consider, and we talked at Intersectional Task Force about, even got to the point of talking possible solutions around signage and other tools to let the community know that if they're feeling unsafe in the park for any reason, whether that's a group that's gathered that shouldn't be gathered there, or whether that is a specific incident of harassment, they need to know where to go and what to do. And in a lot of cases, as we've discussed in this Human Rights Commission, the traditional response of going to law enforcement isn't something in some of our communities that is necessarily people's first inclination, because there's some mistrust also of law enforcement in that process. So thinking about what people's options might be if they're feeling unsafe or unsure of what's going on at the park, I think would be a good direction to take the conversation.
Gretchen,
Yeah, go ahead, Dylan. Sorry,
this is Dylan. I'll just respond. And Mike, thank you so much. And I really appreciate that. And I'll note that during the meeting was the first time I'd learned about the Safe Spaces project that was underway. And I think that, and like you said, we got to some really interesting solution ideas that we talked about. So we're lots of notes from that meeting and really excited for us to take that to heart. And I think anything else that folks have to expand on that here tonight, but absolutely right. I think that there is a lot of focus on the response aspect, and there are two pieces here, and I appreciate what you're saying, though, that perhaps the policies and the permitting themselves. And so I think we have a little bit of a limited charge in terms of our own subcommittee that we're trying to stay within, but I think trying to make sure our recommendations are going to make a difference and make sure that we're looking at the full scope of the issue and concerns. And I think things like signage, for example, are solutions that can fit nicely within that. So I appreciate the way you're framing it and helping us step back and make sure that we're bringing the conversation and exploring it to the fullest extent.
Other experiences. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, this is Keith. And just thinking about kind of the intersection there of the permitting and Mike's comments about safe space. And I just wonder if there are ways we can consider in the permitting process how a group being permitted or a gathering being permitted is not going to be a group that's going to create an unsafe space, right? Or how do you, and I don't know how one writes that into policy, right? But I think that's maybe a way to kind of intersect some of the concepts that we brought up, Mike, with the intersectional task force and more our limited charge of permitting is how do we make sure the permitting procedure and the activities permitted by parks help advance, or at least don't help advance safe space and community in the parks, and don't contribute to the degradation of that in the parks. And perhaps to Tricarico's point is the equity lens that this group put forward to council that I got to see as part of the library strategic planning committee last week. That might be helpful to that process.
Other comments or pieces of input?
Yeah, this is Tricarico. I guess I would ask, like, what is the parks and the permitting process role in keeping the spaces safe? Because kind of to the point of people who use the space and then are unwelcoming or are harassing people or are causing harm, like what does that look like, right? And how could the current permit process, maybe it does already, put forth some expectations as to how people behave when they're using public spaces? I mean, obviously, freedom of speech, all that jazz, but like, we can delineate where that stops of, you know, you don't get to harass people, you don't get to use hate speech, etc. And maybe that could be a way of, again, just putting out those expectations, right, of people who use the public park are not going to then exclude other people based on protected classes or perpetuate harm in the community. I realize that, you know, like the situation from the community member that we heard from in the equity or the intersectional task force, you know, those were not people who were using a permit, right? So that necessarily wouldn't prevent that situation. But I think it could still be beneficial to consider.
Thank you. Other comments or pieces of input?
This is Dylan. I would just reply that that's a really interesting point, Tricarico, in terms of setting those expectations. And we've gone through a lot of our city permits, and I'll admit it's been about a month now since I really dug into those. So I need to review them to see how much of that is spelled out. But Robert, I see you're back on camera. I don't know if you have any response to share, but otherwise we can take that to heart and make sure that as we look through the permits again, we can consider where that could be incorporated.
Sure. Tricarico, that was an excellent point. Sorry, I had to leave. I'm in City Hall and the.
Who's speaking?
Oh, Robert, sorry.
Thank you.
Robert. Tricarico, thank you very much for that comment. I had to step away for a moment because I'm in City Hall and the light timer went out and suddenly I was the ghost on the screen. We can certainly establish some policies and agreements, expectations in the permit. So when you apply for a permit, you sign, I will follow all these things. And we can certainly look at that and how we define it and make it clear so that it is enforceable in some way, possibly if they violate those policies that we've set, then they don't get a reserve next time. I don't know how we do that, but we can certainly look into that.
This is Kathy. I think any opportunity that we have or the city has to let people know what is not okay to do to other people and make them feel safe, we should take advantage of that. So I think that's a great idea, Tricarico, to put something in. So if you are applying for a permit, then you know these are things that we're not okay with. So yeah, I agree with all the comments that everybody's made so far. Some great suggestions.
Woody, thank you.
Yeah, it's Woody. We're working, I'm thinking, park rules and code of conduct and things that are acceptable and unacceptable in parks. So I think that's probably a major portion of the background of the permitting system.
This is Tricarico. I think I'm also thinking about times when the community has reacted negatively, and rightly so, to actual hate groups trying to reserve public spaces. You know, so part of that policy can be, you know, who is reserving this? Because I think that's a piece that people sometimes don't think about when they think about diversity and inclusion is, or tolerance is, none of those things means tolerating hate groups. None of those things means tolerating groups who advocate for things like violence against minorities, genocide, etc. Right? We can say no to public groups who support those things. So I think part of the permit process should include, like, who is this group and what are the things they're going to be saying? Because yes, I know we have some of the loosest freedom of speech laws in the country, but I think we can draw the line at that group creates a dangerous environment for members of our community.
This is Robert, and I should respond. There was a silence there, unintended. Normally, this subcommittee has one of the assistant city attorneys assigned to it to make sure that we stay consistent with state, federal constitutional law. So we'll look into that. That's a very good comment. But I'm an engineer, so I'm gonna be cautious about responding and how we can do that. It's a good, excellent idea.
Other comments or pieces of input, discussion items?
Gretchen, this is Dylan. If I may just, we're happy to take all the input tonight, but I just want to remind people, if you have additional thoughts after this, we encourage you to email us either through Robert or Tony. And then we are scheduling at least one, if not one or two public meetings that we're in the process of doing right now. So we'll make sure that those are shared. And as this process continues, that we will keep you all informed and at least with some of the written updates of what we put forth.
Thank you. That's super kind of you. Just, I cannot, to get at one of your questions, I cannot recall in the 8 years I've been working with the Human Rights Commission and the resultant calls from the community about issues of discrimination, I can't recall a situation that relates to the permitting experience or the process itself. Anytime we get a call around, it's more like what Mike described about just if someone's feeling unsafe or troubled by an interaction or experienced a hate crime, those sorts of things, which are more in the experience of the physical space instead of in the policy or in the experience of receiving a permit. So in case that's helpful. But I know we don't know what we don't know. One of the weaknesses, we have an open invitation to the community to report issues of bias and discrimination and hate. But we don't know what we don't know. If we don't have the opportunity to have conversations with folks, we don't know. We don't know. But based on the reports we receive. Well, if there's no other conversation, I would just say thank you to everybody from SPRAP who participated as a city employee. It's fun for me to see two of our boards or commissions interacting with each other. We appreciate all of you so much and the work that you do to advise our community and serve the city. And thank you for coming together to have this dialogue. I'm personally enjoying it a lot.
This is Dylan, and I'll just thank you. Thank you all so much for having us, and thank you, Gretchen, for guiding the conversation.
Very good.
And this is Tony. Thank you so much, everyone, for having us.
Of course, very good. Okay, well, commissioners, should we move to the next moment on the agenda? I had skipped over public comment with the understanding at my end that there wasn't other public comment, but I should come back and double check that. Is there any other public comment that anyone intended to make? Okay, very good. Well, bias crime is next on the agenda, and Debbie was unable to be with us tonight, but sent me a written report, and regrettably, it's been a week, it's been a month. Let's see, since our last meeting, there's been 2 bias crimes reported. One was near the end of June, and a person damaged some property and also physically hit a victim at a business. In the process, in that experience, they used anti-Asian comments while committing the crime. The suspect left prior to police arrival, and there's no suspect information available at this time. And we reached out to the person who experienced that. The other situation happened, one person was assaulted by another person, and in that assault, the person made a comment that they were going to assault the victim due to their race prior to the assault. Again, there are some video footage in this situation, and we're working on identifying a suspect, but don't have a suspect identified or arrested at this time. So both related to race in this situation. Let's see, there was also a bias incident reported since the last commission meeting. And in this case, a person on a public transportation service was yelling racial slurs at another rider. And in this case, officers arrived and cited them for trespass and escorted them off. And so in that case, there was an ability to make an impact on the suspect. Oh, forgive me. There's other bias incidents as well. I was reading the document a little bit wrong. There was also a situation with a neighbor and children using anti-LGBTQIA+ language towards another neighbor who was in a same-sex relationship. The neighbor denies using the language, but there was a report of that language being used. And then there was also an issue with a neighbor menacing another neighbor related to fireworks. And the one neighbor heard another use a term which they felt was derogatory toward their race. The other neighbor indicates they didn't use that term. And but given the other dynamics in the situation, the person was arrested on charges, and it was documented as a bias incident. And then we also received report of a business receiving a voicemail from someone who left negative comments about a flyer that was posted in a public space related to lives lost during encounters with police. And so that was another incident that was reported. And in this case and in others, the folks are also referred to the Oregon Department of Justice hotline so that those experiences can be sure to be included in the reports that are coming from the Department of Justice. You might have seen recently in the news, they've done some annual reporting now and been able to talk about incidents across Oregon. But that concludes the bias crime and bias incident report that Debbie would have provided, if there's any questions. Okay, very good. Then I'll roll into the complaints, concerns of discrimination. And I had one that reemerged from quite a few months ago. And I was so glad to be able to talk to the people again. The people involved in this situation brought up a situation from months ago and raised some new concerns that mount to and add to the previous concerns reported. So I was really grateful to have the conversation and try to look again into the situation that's happening. And it relates to concerns of systematic exclusion from opportunity into being able to deliver services and work. So I'm hoping to be able to make some progress, and was really glad to reconnect with the people. But that's the only thing that I had to report that didn't come in through the police department. Okay, then the next, we still do not have quorum, so I'm going to transition us then into the task force and project updates. And I want to apologize to Mike. Mike did not get notes from me in advance of this meeting, so I apologize. I haven't had a chance to get those prepared yet. But Mike, go ahead.
That's okay. I remember what we talked about. I keep it in my noggin. At LGBTQIA plus intersectional task force, pretty similar conversation to the conversation we had just now. The main difference was that the community member that came to our last full commission meeting also came to the intersectional task force and gave us more detail on the harassment that they had experienced in the parks. And I was grateful to hear from that community member. And if they're watching this video on YouTube, like nobody really does, I just felt so honored that she came and shared her experience in both of those venues to give us as commissioners more information about what our community members experience. If you are, deeply bored and want to watch that task force meeting, you can learn more about that community members experience, but it kind of helped guide the conversation with the Parks Board around some potential solutions. We talked a bit more also about Safe Spaces Project and where we're at with things, and need just a couple more, I think, meetings to be able to bring that work more fully to the HRC for your review and approval, and to move forward. There's a budget component that we will need to make a request of as well. So I think that was everything from LGBTQIA. And I think Tricarico's task force is like in between my two task forces on the agenda. Was I supposed to talk about awareness first? Is it alphabetical?
It is, but that's totally okay. We can roll with you. No worries.
I could talk about awareness. I just realized I rolled into one task force, but I'll talk about awareness briefly. We talked about just communication planning for the survey results. And we had a representative from the city's communication staff who was there to provide guidance and support. That work is really pinned on me right now. I was waiting for the more detailed survey information that Marianne was going to provide us, and she did finally provide that to us last week. Did that go to the full commission, Gretchen? Do you know the detailed?
It did.
Okay, great. So now that all of that detailed information is in, I'm going to write up a little piece and work with Kathy at the city to make sure it meets the city's needs, and we'll pass that along to the commission as well. We really just kind of talked about the direction of that piece, and we thought that the students had a really good summary in their presentation, and that really we could kind of use that as the template for the communications, that we didn't need to reinvent the wheel there, that the students were sharp and they figured out what needed to be said. So there's a little bit of work on me to draft up some things. And we think that the reporter that covered it at the Salem Reporter last year will be interested in covering it again. So I'll try to get that out in the next week or so. Just got to put my fingers on the keyboard and tap it out.
Thank you so much. Any questions for Mike? Well, this is Gretchen. As Tricarico is beginning, I also owe them an apology. Tricarico is waiting on me to schedule some time for this committee to meet in consultation with the city attorney to examine the issues. And I have been negligent in getting that scheduling work done. So I wanted to apologize, Tricarico, as you take the microphone.
This is Tricarico. Yeah, that's totally fine. I was racking my brain like, oh my gosh, did that get scheduled and I missed it somehow and I have to give an update. So that's where we're at with that. A little bit of kind of update, even though it's technically over on the equity lens piece. The city library is doing a strategic plan and they are using our equity lens as part of that. And Dr. Brown and I were able to join a conversation around that and make some connections. There were some interesting conversations, I'll put it at that. But the good news is we have some continued conversations that Dr. Brown and I have committed to with the library to aid them in adopting that lens. So that was really cool to be a part of. And thank you to Gretchen and Mike for connecting us with that. I think it'll be really awesome to see our lens used, you know, in various parts of the city. So I thought that was kind of a fun thing to share with the group.
Excellent. Any questions for Tricarico? All right, very good. Well, we're on to staff updates. We are clipping quickly in this meeting tonight. I had just one staff update, and it's to let you know and invite your feedback. And I want to quickly jump over and see if I have anything else from Angelo as I'm doing so. Yes, okay, very good. Sorry about that. I wanted to read Angelo's reply to me. I wanted to let you know that as the city responds to the changing nature of the pandemic and opens more things to in-person services, in this next phase of everything, the boards and commissions and committees have the opportunity to figure if they'd like to come back in person or continue on Zoom. We've also discussed the hybrid idea, and at the moment don't have the ability to implement a complete hybrid model. There's some conversations underway about how do you make sure that's completely participatory for everybody. Like if you have 8 persons in the room and 1 person on the Zoom, you know, there's some questions raised there. So we're trying to figure that out. But in the meantime, Angelo and I wanted to get your input as to if you'd like at our next meeting, which would be August 11th, and really those of you involved in the subcommittees, would you like to come back now in person or keep on Zoom and get your feedback? The reopening of the doors is Monday, so any of our future meetings this would now apply to. So I'll just open it up to the group and see if there's preferences or feedback.
I know that a lot of people have found value in accessibility. Oh, this is Mike. I know that a lot of people have found value in accessibility in the Zoom meetings and being able to participate in them from remote locations. I also sometimes find value in having face-to-face interactions with people because there's things that you can get out of a face-to-face conversation. And so I wondered if the city is technology enabled to have hybrid options where some people can be on premises if they are available to do so, and others can still conference in.
That's what's being worked on right now. There's recognition of the value of that so that we can basically achieve both and have people select what would work best for them. But at this time, they weren't ready to open that as a choice, but it's actively being developed or worked on. So at this time, they asked if we would choose either in person or online while the hybrid is getting developed, essentially.
This is Kathy. I was going to say pretty much the same thing that Mike said. I think the Zoom meetings are very convenient and accessible, but at the same time, I think in person can be really effective. So I do have a question. Our meetings are at 5:30. Did they used to be at a later time when they were in person?
They did.
So that might be.
They did. They used to be at 6:15, if my memory serves me. So, well, that would be a resultant conversation. If you want to come back in person, I wanted to confirm if you'd want to start at 6:15 instead of 5:30.
Yeah.
Many aren't here tonight, so I could also do a quick email poll, but wanted to make sure to get the question out to all of you. I think the hybrid will remain a really active conversation. Like, I will convey your feedback back about the value of a hybrid, and like you, others have also spoken to that. And so that's a very real possibility in the near future. But I think maybe for the month of August and the rest of July, we would just have a choice to make if you want to stay on Zoom or come back to the city manager's office conference room. The library isn't open yet. We, at one point, were using the library Anderson rooms, and those are not open yet because the construction is continuing. But we could come back to the city manager's office conference room if you like, or stay on Zoom, either way.
This is Mike, and I think it's a good idea to poll. I know for me, if it's an either or, it's probably Zoom, because I want to be inclusive of as many people as possible. And some people are just going to have, I think that's one of the things we've learned in the pandemic, is that some people, it is just way better for their lives and everything to be able to do it this way. But I really am supportive of a poll and getting the pulse of what everybody feels.
Very good. And I'm seeing some other nods, so I'll do that. And I don't have any staff updates. The community calendar remains really weak. I have the impression that all of the event announcements these days are on social media where I am not seeing them. And so I remain welcoming to your referrals to me of events that I can place on there. I spend some time on social media, but I don't think enough to really get all the good stuff. So don't hesitate to send me what you see that you think would be of interest on our community calendar. That takes us to member remarks and announcements, I think.
This is Kathy. I have a question for you, Gretchen. Have you heard much feedback from council or the mayor to the recommendations that we put forth? I know we got the response from Lieutenant Aguilar on the police department specific recommendations, but I'm just curious what the word is on the rest.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for reminding me about that. I had intended to sort of collect those conversations and bring you that as part of the staff update. So Kathy, thank you for asking. Yes, in sort of one-on-one kinds of ways. It hasn't come in any sort of formal agenda item to City Council. I think the council members have been asking questions about the components and thinking about the pieces and thinking, okay, this would be a budget thing. This we're working on over here. This we're working on over there. I think there's conversations happening. I've been involved in a number of kind of exploratory inquiries, but no kind of formal no formal sort of discussions. It's been all kind of experiencing and absorbing so far. Different staff have also engaged similarly. I've had a number of requests from colleagues for the document and follow-up questions about, well, is it okay if we use the equity lens, or, oh, I'm working on this a little bit over here, and that sort of thing, but nothing in a kind of a comprehensive way yet. I think that's possible. That's one possibility, is that they'll bring the whole topic in a very formal way, or we may continue to kind of work on threads. My intention's been to go through each of the items, making notes on what I understand the status to be, and bring that back to you. I feel like that should be maybe a regular part of the update, or even a regular separate agenda item. And there's some things that you've made inquiry on, for example, that we want to make sure we're bringing back. You know, I've had people ask me, well, do you think this and this and this would be a part of what we report back? And so I think we're sort of in a info gathering phase, but I want to be able to keep an update for you on the status of all of the actions on all of the pieces. So I'm seeing several of you nod, so that's probably a good idea. I could make it underneath agenda, perhaps under agenda number 5, where it says task force and project updates. We could put your recommendations and have that be a standing item for a while. Okay, I'm seeing lots of thumbs. Yeah. And then that way we can just go through and report and have a bit of a task tracker around making sure we're not losing any of the threads. That sounds okay.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Tricarico. I think that's a great idea, Gretchen, because I know a lot of people, the whole goal was to have continued conversations around the things that we see. And I really want to honor that. And I really want to make it clear, if you aren't already in those conversations you're having with folks, that we really want to keep that dialogue going and work with people. I know that Dr. Brown has volunteered additional time of his to talk about the equity lens, since he was a huge part of that. I would be happy to do so. And I know other HRC members would, as well as the general recommendations. So yes, I'm totally in favor of that. And I want to keep that spirit going.
Awesome.
I have one more question. I don't want, this is Kathy. I don't want to speak over anyone else, but is the meeting, Gretchen, that you were referring to schedule about Chapter 97, would that be the discussion about adding housing status as a protected class? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Because I think just based on recent events and things that I'm hearing from different community members, I think it's time to go there. But I wanted to double check that that's what the purpose of that was. Okay.
Any other remarks or announcements? All right, short meeting, everybody, but good to see everyone. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Time.
Thank
Bye
you.
from
Thank you
Kathy
very
or
much.